Bob Jensen has been dropping by the Main Street studio from time to time to share some of his spoken word poetry with us. A lot of effort and thought goes into his writing, with the result being words that can cut to the very heart. He dropped by earlier this week with 2 poems, one that deals with the issue of abuse within the church, so we do issue a caution for some listeners. Bob also brought us up to date on his latest spoken word poetry projects. Hi, Bob. It's great to have you in again.
Thank you so much for having me back, Angela.
And you're sharing spoken word poetry with us, which is a lovely thing to have on Main Street. And before we get to a chat, Bob, I'd love for you to share another poem for us. What are we going to hear?
This is a poem I wrote last October. You'll recall that last autumn was particularly beautiful. And I was out one morning when, the colors were at their peak. And it was early in the morning, and there was this flock of geese breaking up the sky, and it was so beautiful, it seemed almost like a sacrament. It seemed holy. And so I've tried to describe that in this poem, and I call it To God in 3 Small Words. Before this blazing bonfire of the vanities of God, when soft the warm west wind is a feather on my face, playful as the infant's laughing eyelashes, a monarch in the sweet caress of flight. These eyes and ears of God, this breath stolen of wonder, the hungry skin of solitude, a mouth that chafes for one small drop of nectar to quench the thirst for color in the soul. I am high upon this holy breeze, basking in the warmth of the valley's maple embers, as roaming V's of southbound geese herald in the dawn and split the morning sky like kindling for yearning in the hungry hearth of man, dividing into realms of east and west the captive heavens, each of whom would kill the fatted calf and claim the wayward son as its own. Raise your arms in wonder, cast the shadow of a dove, expel your final breath to God in 3 small words. It is done, for the heart of man is crucified upon this peaceful hill, where providence is burning for beauty on its knees.
Another beautiful poem, Bob.
Thank you very much, Angela.
And poetry for you, are you writing, is it a daily thing when inspiration comes to you? Do you sit down and say, today I'm writing a poem? How does it go for you?
I try to write every day, and there are periods where I do that very consistently, but lately I've been also busy with sort of logistical things as I'm in the studio working on a couple of spoken word books, and I'm also working on an actual book. I've got so many things on the go, so I spend some time working on things like mixing and artwork and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm creative every day. I work. I usually start work at 5 in the morning, and I go till about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then I have supper, and then I do my creative stuff in the evenings.
Wow, you never stop then.
I'm busy.
Tell us about this project in studio right now with Chris Corrigan.
Yeah, I'm working with Chris on a couple of things. One is we're recording some stuff for the Other Voices project that I've told you about that is going to feature a couple of dozen artists from all over the world, from 4 continents. And I'm also working towards another audiobook that's going to be released sometimes in 2019. And this time it's going to have much higher production values, and we're going to have music and sound effects. Chris Corrigan has been doing some fantastic stuff with the guitar, and I've got some other people from around the world lined up to do some work. And next week, we're going to get Natalie from Atlantic String Machine to come in.
So talented, yes.
Yeah, and do some cello, which I'm very excited about. I'm listening to the stuff that Chris is sending me, after we've been in the studio, and it's still rough, but I'm genuinely excited about it. It's really good to be creative and to be so privileged as to work with people of that caliber.
We're going to talk about a Christmas project that you have coming up. But before we get to that, you have another poem you want to share with us. It's a difficult poem.
Yeah, it is. I grew up in northern New Brunswick, and there was a great deal of sexual abuse within the Catholic Church, and it impacted a great many people I knew. And one of the most disturbing things that I could imagine about this whole thing was that these kids would have to go in front of the church every Sunday and receive communion from their tormentor. And so that was the genesis of this poem. And I think it is a kind of a difficult poem, but it's something that I felt needed to be said. I call it a heavy millstone. We gathered, we, the faithful, when summoned by that bell, the small, the weak, the innocent, drawn to its knell. 3 hours hid the sun when that vulgar show began, the rapist with the Eucharist upon his filthy hands, hands that tore the fleece from the smallest faithful lamb, and hands that left the soul defiled and primed it to be damned. And when his rape had finished and Mass had then begun, he placed the holy host upon the slaughtered lamb's young tongue. 100 faithful in their pews knew well the Father's sin, yet offered up those trusting doves, their precious, helpless kin. Men who to a burning house to save the child within would rush without a thought, allowed that sacrificial sin. And women, selfless shepherds, who were turned back from the inn, sat silent and obedient, while the faithful flock was thinned. And in that great cathedral, built to glorify his God, the bishop killed the lamb, when he spared the priest his rod. And for every priest and layman who hid the vulgar truth, may there be a heavy millstone to justify lost youth.
And that poem speaks for itself. I do want to just change the mood here, though, Bob, and we are going to talk about this Christmas project.
Okay.
And this sounds really exciting.
Yeah, it is. I have a poem I call The Swallowtail. It's a Christmas poem, and Lenny Gallant actually recorded it a year ago. And I decided this year that I was going to record it and set it to music and release it as a single across Canada to CBC and community radio campus. And I've recruited Tony McManus, who is considered the greatest Celtic guitarist in the world. So I did my part here with Chris in Charlottetown, and Tony over the weekend did his part with Jerry Marotta in New York. And apparently Jerry has worked with Paul McCartney and Peter Gabriel and
wow.
Lou Reed. And yeah, so the production values are very high, and I was amazed at what Tony did. It's just, it's more than I would have hoped for. So I've got that kind of in the can. We're working on the artwork and a few little things, and I'm going to release it. It'll be for sale on all the digital platforms, you know, Amazon and iTunes and all that stuff. But it's also going out to radio across Canada and to some international markets as well. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Well, we can't hear it yet, but we do look forward to hearing it in the future.
Okay. Well, maybe at some point I can come in with some Christmas stuff.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Bob.
Thank you very much.
I'm Bob Jensen. We'll be back at some point before Christmas to share some more spoken word poetry with us.